You're listening to the Tony Steuer Podcast, where Tony interviews financial literacy advocates who are changing the conversation on money, so you can catch up on the latest trends and ideas in the world of financial literacy and education.
Welcome to the Tony Steuer Podcast. I'm pleased to be joined today by Elliott Appel. Elliott is the founder of Kindness Financial Planning. In this episode, we'll be discussing how to get people to talk about money. Elliott, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks, Tony. I appreciate you having me.
Yeah, thanks for joining us today. So, as we get started, this is where I always like to get started at the beginning. Tell us a little bit about what is your origin story? How did you get started in financial education?
Yeah, so I went through sort of the process of elimination through college of the different areas of life that you might want to major in, and ended up taking a finance course and just falling in love with it, which didn't come too big of a surprise for me just because my uncle did get me started investing when I was younger. And I really enjoyed that. But there was something about going through the process of those different courses and then ended up with an internship at a major brokerage company. Ended up loving that, but didn't love the sales side of that and having the different products or services that you could pitch. Saw the registered investment side of the business and just fell in love with it. Being able to work with people and really provide your time and your expertise and knowledge as opposed to certain products, and being able to offer that with the coordination of financial planning and insurance and investments and tax planning and bringing it all together for people. So that's the short version of it.
Oh, fantastic. Yeah. And that's great. I think people go through that discovery process as they get into personal finance. And it's interesting because, you've been doing this for a while. You have your own podcast. People come into it from very different ways. So there's not just one path.
Yes. And I was very lucky. I mean, I landed at a registered investment advisor right out of college and worked for them up until the time that I launched my own firm about a year ago. And so I feel very fortunate because I know a lot of people do bounce around and see different sides of the industry more so than I did.
Yeah, definitely. And I hear the same thing. I mean, there's, it's a tricky issue with the brokers and the commission-based products. It's like, I think each has their place. I don't know. What do you think?
Yeah, no, I absolutely think there is a place for almost everything that exists in financial services today. I'll put sort of an asterisk there because I think there's a few things that probably shouldn't exist. But yeah, I think it depends on what a consumer is looking for, right? There's a place for an insurance agent. There's a place for a broker. There's a place for a financial planner. It just depends on what method someone is looking for, even within the financial planner space, whether they're looking for a short engagement or an ongoing engagement, right? People want different things, just like there's different products out there. There's different services that exist for consumers.
Yeah, no, that's a great point. And I mean, we could probably do a whole episode on this, is that I'm not sure the financial services industry does a great job of educating consumers on those things and matching, what you're looking for, versus the type of planners that there are. And people oftentimes then get frustrated in their relationship because it's not, and they don't even know the questions to ask, to choose their advisor.
Yes, I agree 100%. It is very confusing, I think, for consumers out there to distinguish the different methods of services and the different jargon we have.
Yeah, I know Michael Kitces. I don't know if you follow Michael Kitces, but he talks a lot about the different levels of advice and everything. And, so it's interesting. So, to switch gears, one of the things that I really appreciated, and which led me to reach out to you is, that you talk about the emotional side of money. So how do you feel that you can connect the emotional and economic sides of money?
Yeah. So Tony, sometimes they don't, and sometimes that's okay. The way I like to frame it with clients is that there's really two sides to every decision. Sometimes there's a spectrum, right? You have the economic side and you have the emotional side. And, let's go through a very simple example: cash approaching retirement, or even paying down a mortgage decision. But I'll do the cash approaching retirement because I work with a lot of retirees. You can go off a general rule of thumb and say, economically, you really don't need more than maybe 3 or 6 months worth of cash and for living expenses on hand at any given time. I think most people would agree with that. It's a general rule of thumb out there. But there's a span of retirees that have anywhere from 0 months to probably up to 5 years or longer for the amount of cash that's on hand. And there are some risk and sort of return trade-offs with that decision that we won't go into detail with. But, when I've talked to people, particularly people approaching retirement for the first time, they're transitioning to it, they're not quite there. Having a little extra cash for a lot of folks feels better. Emotionally, that is a good thing, right? They know exactly where their spending is going to come from for the first 2 years. And that can provide a lot of peace of mind. Now, economically, probably not the best decision in most market environments, but for those people to be able to sleep better at night, to have that peace of mind, that's worth the return. It's worth giving up that. And that's why I say it's connecting the two. And sometimes it's a disconnect. And a lot of people sometimes have a gut decision that they feel strongly one way or the other about a certain decision. And in that case, the emotional side of that is going to outweigh any of the economic stuff. And that's okay. And other times, maybe there's a trade-off that they're willing to go more towards the economic side. So I'll pause there for a second.
Well, no, that's awesome. I think that's really putting the personal in personal finance is, and I think people oftentimes miss that is that I think you do make a very good point, is that it's what does the person want to accomplish, but also what makes them comfortable. Is I like having a larger emergency fund. I know it's more than I need to have in cash equivalents, but you know what, for me, it works.
Yeah.
But I wouldn't recommend necessarily to a client that they have as much cash, but
Exactly.
yeah, I'm sorry.
I was just going to say, and it's just talking through the trade-offs of that decision and being comfortable with that and recognizing that here are the pros and cons of this decision. Here are the pros and cons of this decision. And I'm okay with that. And I think that's the great thing is you can help someone come to that conclusion after getting to know them, because we don't live in spreadsheets. I can show you the best economic decision, but it may not mean anything to you going through that experience if it doesn't feel good.
Yeah. So what's your experience? Do you feel that your clients tend to stick with the recommendation better when they've really bought into that emotional side of it?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, when you can go through the process and get to know someone and figure out what is actually important to them and what are they concerned about? What are the types of things down the road that may throw the plan off track emotionally, right? If XYZ happens and we don't have ABC in place, that could potentially wreck their retirement or throw their retirement off plans or, whatever the decision is. If they have really bought into the decision, and more so that they've made the decision for themselves, not me telling them, here's my recommendation. It's let's get to this recommendation together.
Yeah, I was going to say my experience as well is that clients tend to, if they come to the realization, then they truly have a buy-in and they tend to stick with whatever the recommendation is instead of going a year later, like, hey, I need to change this, or I don't remember why I did this. And, then it's like, it doesn't work for anyone. That's a great point. So I think one of the points you bring up, leads into our next question is, how can people go through a major health event and then figure out what comes next? How did they make that transition when something does happen?
Yeah, I mean, that's an excellent question. And I think one we're all figuring out as people get older, and you have people caring for parents, and parents are figuring out their own health and what they're doing. But, I'll just talk personally, some resources that have been helpful in my life and, major health events that I've experienced with my dad is, getting palliative care involved really early. I think a lot of people associate palliative care with hospice, and they're very different. And being able to talk through with a doctor of what are possible resources given my illness and given whatever path I'm on or whatever the typical one is, right? No one knows what their health experience is going to be like, but what is the average progression for whatever this illness is, and what resources are available and what would be helpful now, but also potentially later. I also think consulting with an elder care consultant, depending on your resources and what you have available in your community, they can be invaluable, just helping set up a transition to a different living facility or getting resources in the home and making you aware of what local resources are available in your city, because each county is a little bit different in what they have available, either for free or for paid, and what's out there. But I also think just being open to things changing and coming back to these conversations regularly with your family and talking about it. I think that's been the biggest thing to help determine sort of what comes next, because no one really knows what comes next. It's more of, we can put a plan in place. Life's probably going to destroy that plan. And then how do we adjust going forward?
Yeah. Yeah. What's it, man? Plans, God laughs, or something, I think is the saying.
Yeah, something like that.
So it seems to sum it up. But I think two of the things that you're saying are really important, that it's about communication and research.
Yeah.
That there's always those basic blocks, with everything, is to, find out your options, talk about it, and learn and ask questions and be curious.
Yeah.
So I think that's great advice. So as you go through this, how does a family maintain control, and why is it important for families to take control of their lives, not let them spiral out of control?
Yeah, so I'm a big fan of life planning. I went through the training last year, if anybody's familiar with George Kinder and the Kinder Institute, but they've got an excellent training for just different ways of approaching financial planning. And I like this because it starts with the person before you ever get to the finances. And this will loop back to your question. But, in terms of taking control, I almost feel like a lot of people need to take maybe 8 steps back before they start from whatever point they are to go forward. Because I don't think a lot of people spend time thinking about what they truly want from life. I mean, how often do people sit down and actually talk to their family about, let's consciously make a decision about like what we're doing this year, what we're doing the next 5 years, the 10 years. And again, we can make the best laid plans. They might not work out, but if you don't have a vision for what you want or what an ideal life would be for you, I think it's going to be really challenging to get control because there's not really a purpose there for you.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think it's taking a few steps back. I'm a big fan of life planning. So doing some of that work, or just, asking broader questions about what you want going forward to then be able to move forward on a more solid or stable foundation, I think is the way that you gain control of that.
Well, I think that's excellent advice, because it's so easy to get caught up in the minutia or the little things, like my big thing's always been, like lately, Bitcoin is, people start the conversation with like, should I buy Bitcoin or not? And I don't think that's the right question. I think the question is, can Bitcoin help you meet your goals that you've already set in your bigger plan? And I think, but that's a change for the industry. Like you said, one of your first jobs was at a brokerage where you're pushing a product like, hey, you've got this mutual fund, and like, how many of your clients need this mutual fund? And so.
Exactly. And it's one of those things that it's tough to do. I'm guilty of it. I'm one of those people who give me the facts or the story and let's go forward. Let's just move from that point. And, I have to remind myself consciously for my own life and in clients' lives of let's pause for a second. Let's reflect on what's happening here, maybe take a few steps back and then potentially move forward.
No, that's great advice. I'm with you. So, as part of that, you also talk about, creating an ideal life. How does someone create an ideal life for themselves?
Again, I'd go back to the life planning. Life planning has some exercises or inspirational work that you can go through to do that. And a lot of it is question and answer. And with that, being able to do it with another person and a professional who's trained in this to really leave the space to have those conversations. I mean, how often do people actually sit in silence after a question and just sort of think about it? Right? Even that space right there was probably a little awkward for us and for any listeners listening. And imagine that longer and being able to actually think and reflect on the question that's being asked to then move forward. But I'm a big fan of questions. Therapy, I think, is also a good thing for a lot of people out there. And just talking more about money. I think the more we talk about something, the easier it is to figure out what we want to do and how to create that ideal life. Whereas if we're shying away from it, if you're not talking about it, how are you ever going to get there?
Yeah, exactly. Because you can't plan for something that you're not even thinking about. And oftentimes, it's a very blanket, like, okay, are you saving enough money for retirement? But what does that really mean? Because, probably even just you and I, that our retirement plans are probably different. Yeah. What represents a perfect retirement for you and what represents a perfect retirement for me. And I think people miss that.
Yeah. I think the other thing, Tony, is trying it out. So whatever it is you want to do. And I think a perfect example is someone who's worked really hard in their career and they don't go to part-time, but instantly retire one day. Well, one day you're working full-time, the next day you don't know what to do with your time. And I've seen that be very challenging for people whose the identity has been tied up in their work. And so I think if you can move to part-time or do some consulting or, sort of try out a mini retirement, take a sabbatical, that sort of thing, just to see what it is you like to do. Are there things you can retire to? That's helpful. Or, I've had clients want to move somewhere. Well, maybe go move there for a month, rent out a place for a month or two, see what it's like to live as a local. Do you actually want to live there? Is that an ideal place for you? So I think some trial and error is helpful before you go full in on an idea.
Yeah, no, I love that. I hadn't really thought about that, with retirement, but, when I think about people who've retired, I do know that some people have struggled with that transition because like all of a sudden, it's like they work 40 hours a week, 60 hours a week. And then all of a sudden, it's like, and a lot of those people go back to work after a year or two.
Yeah.
Because they didn't really plan out. And I was commenting on something today on a post that, about college loans and that, oftentimes in the decision-making process, people talk about financially friendly colleges at the end of the conversation, where you're focused on the academics and you focus on this and that, rather than talking about the money up front. And I think that's a thing, that ideal life is like, okay, well, if you go to the college of your dreams, then, you may be carrying a lot of student debt for years that's going to impact the rest of your life. And I love this whole life planning. So with that, can you share a little bit more about, what is a life planner and what does that entail? What's different?
Yeah, I think it's so hard to define. And I wish some trainers were here from the Kinder Institute because they do such a better job of defining it. But I would describe the process more so than what they are. But I think the saying goes, it's financial planning done right. And, basically you're going through a series of at least 3 meetings before you ever get to the investment. So high level overview, you're just having an exploration meeting of what's important to you and putting everything on the table. So it's not really narrowing it down to these are the 3 things that are important to me. It's just, what are all the things that are important to you? And then the second meeting is more about vision. So narrowing down what are the most important or essential elements of your life. So taking it, really 50,000 foot level, and let's get it a little bit narrower to these are the things that are really meaningful to me that I need to have in my life to have that ideal life. And then from there, you go to an obstacles meeting, which is one of my favorites because it's the question, what could possibly get in the way? So knowing how important it is to get this vision, what could get in the way? Because I think naturally, and I think myself and others, we tend to go to the negatives first of like, oh, this is a problem. This is a problem. This is why I can't do that. And we just create these ideas, real or perceived, of what could get in the way. And what I really like about this meeting is it's putting it back. I don't know if putting it back is the right language, but putting it in the client's hands to come up with solutions. So it's not me as the financial planner saying, here's what you need to do. It's talking through and asking the right questions and help being a guide to come to their own solutions. What's amazing about it is people come up with some really unique and amazing solutions that I would personally never think of because it's not my life. It's not my ideal life. I'm not trying to come up with solutions for it. It's them and them having the buy-in for that. So it's starting with those 3 meetings and having those conversations to figure out what's important. Again, creating the space for it. And then moving to the financial planning and then the investments and going through, I would say, more the traditional financial planning and investment management after that point, after you've gotten to know someone, after they've hopefully helped discover what is that ideal life that they're trying to create and connecting that money back to those important things.
Yeah. And I agree completely. I think that's where you can, we can really change the way, people are dealing with their finances because, it's not like, because investment allocation, it's super important, but it's not really important to our clients. I mean, it is and it's not.
Yeah.
But that's not what they're trying to solve. You may have a few people who are focused and, want to talk about that immediately, but really people are trying to say, like we've been talking about, is like, I want to live my dream retirement. And I think our job as a planner, I wasn't a financial planner, I was an insurance consultant to financial planners, so I help financial planners design the thing. But, you're really trying to say, okay, well, what's the best thing that's going to benefit my client? How are what we're doing, is that, really benefiting the client? Or is that just, are we drowning them in details that are unnecessary, or jumping to those too quickly?
Yeah. I mean, you put it perfectly earlier that no one really cares about their asset allocation. They care what that asset allocation can do for them. Can they retire from work early? Can they do consulting? Can they put their kids through college? All those bigger questions that are more important than, am I 60% stocks and 40% bonds or some other allocation? Most people don't care about that.
Yeah. Yeah, there's a few do, but it's pretty minor. So, I don't know if you're following the College for Financial Planning, and that they've put in that, I think it's a psychology component. Have you been following that?
I know they did, but I don't know much about it at this point.
Okay, yeah, I don't either. So we should talk about it.
I took my CFP studies a long time ago, so I haven't stayed as up to date on it.
Yeah, no, I know they've added something, so it's coming as part of the conversation, this whole financial therapy, there's a growing movement to bring that together. And, George Kinder, he's been doing this, I think, for 20 years or something. I know it's been around. He's had it for quite a while. With the registered life planner.
He was almost, I feel like, before his time in a way, because he's been doing it a long time and advocating for this, but I feel like it's only in the past few years starting to gain a little more traction.
Yeah, I think as people started really making that connection, because, I've been in the business for a long time, and it was very product driven. And, I started in the 1980s, and, very product driven, and, no load mutual funds for the new kid on the block. And, that was a whole different way of looking at things.
Yeah.
So seeing that whole battle. So, as we wrap up, can you share with us, what is your number one tip on financial wellness?
Number one tip on financial wellness. I think just don't be afraid to get into the weeds and ask questions that may seem foolish, because I don't think there are foolish questions out there when it comes to money. I think the lack of conversations that we're having, and sort of the scarcity around money conversations, is what drives a lot of the problems. So, talk to family, talk to friends, make it a little uncomfortable, and obviously ask permission. Hey, do you want to have a conversation about money? But I think the wellness part is going to come from normalizing conversations around money, and talking about salaries, and talking about spending, and not just the perceived things that we see going on in other people's lives, but what they're actually doing. So I always try to have conversations. And when I say I'm a financial planner, people are more akin to opening up and talking about money, which is exciting, because I can tell they haven't had these conversations in their lives.
Yeah, no, and that's interesting, is because, we read all the statistics, and, about how many people don't have an emergency fund or this or that. But when you actually talk to people, they're thinking about different things. That's not the first question out of their mind. It's like, hey, can you help me set up an emergency fund?
Exactly.
While it might be a basic task on the list, that's not what people are thinking. And I love what you said is, the foolish questions. There really isn't. The only foolish questions in my mind are the questions that you don't ask.
Yeah.
That's a foolish question. But we're intimidated to ask questions about our money and to open up, because, we don't want to, admit that we don't know something, or we feel like, hey, I should be on top of this. Or in the financial services industry, I don't know if you feel this way, but, that it sort of talks down to people in a way.
Yeah.
Like it is constantly telling people what they've done wrong. Like you haven't saved enough money for retirement, or your investments aren't set up correctly. And then people are like, God, I don't want to hear everything that I've done wrong. Tell me something I've done right.
Yeah.
What am I doing well? So
Yeah.
Fantastic. I love.
Our industry historically has not done a great job of that. And I think it depends on where you end up and who you're with. And I think that's why it's important to surround yourself with people who lift you up in those conversations.
Yeah, I think that's great advice, to surround yourself with people who lift you up. So, Elliott, where can people learn more about you? Where can they follow you? Where can they stay in touch with you?
Yeah. So my firm website, Kindness Financial Planning LLC, is kindnessfp, as in financialplanning.com. You can also find me on Twitter, Elliott Appel, Appel. And then I've also got a Facebook for my firm, but I'm most active on Twitter, and then my blogging, and then my podcast, makingthemostoftime.com. You can find it on all the major podcast players.
Fantastic. And for everybody watching and listening, I'll be posting links as usual to all of the things that Elliott mentioned, so you can find him and follow him on Twitter and check out the good work he's doing. Elliott, thanks again for joining me today. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you, Tony. I really enjoyed the conversation.
And to everybody tuning in, thanks again for watching or listening to the Tony Steuer Podcast. Until next time.